Welcome back to our channel. My name is Derek, this is Mike, and today we are coming to you from beautiful Tivoli Gardens and the Pantomime Theater, and we're gonna go around Copenhagen to deliver you 14 mind-blowing facts about the city of Copenhagen itself.
Copenhagen has so much to offer. It's got all kinds of history, culture, and so much more. So we're gonna take you all around the city. It's been beautiful. Let's go check it out. The name Copenhagen actually comes from the meaning of merchant's harbor. I think with the Absalon and the playhouse behind me, maybe today it's more like performer's harbor, or when the nice weather is out, people sitting along the harbor would be a better name. But merchant's harbor is because that is what the core of Copenhagen was when it was founded and grew as a city. This is an area that was more just a small fishing village. It was close to the sea, kind of protected, but it wasn't that important of a place until the, say, 12th or 13th century when it started to grow here and they started to build castles here and it started to get built up. This harbor here used to be a point where merchants would come and trade, and so that's where the name comes from. The Danish name for the city is Copenhagen, which literally comes from the root of Køb, which is to buy, and Havn, which is harbor. So as you look at Copenhagen and other languages, it keeps that connection of merchant harbor in the name. Even in English, where the Copen at the first part of the name comes from Middle English terms for merchants that would go around and trade in different places.
Let me tell you a little story about the bustling city of Copenhagen. Would you believe that this vibrant metropolis was once just a small fishing village dating back to the 11th century? It's true, but things really started to take off in the year 1167. That's when Bishop Absalon decided to build a small fortress on Slotsholmen, which is actually where Christianborg Palace, the seat of Danish parliament, sits today. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who the heck is this Bishop Absalon guy? Well, friend, I'll tell you, he was quite the character. Not only was he a bishop, but he was also a warrior knight. He played a crucial role in driving the growth of the Danish monarchy and expanding Danish territory well into the Baltic Sea. And get this, he even helped retain Danish control in the region by establishing closer political ties with the Pope instead of relying on the Holy Roman Empire. He was one heck of a statesman and was one of the king's closest advisors. You can come here to the metro stop at Gammelstrand and Højbroplatz to actually see what he looked like. You can see a statue of Absalon in Højbroplatz at the Gammelstrand metro station, although we're not sure exactly what he looked like because sadly he died before he was able to start an Instagram account. But you can also follow us on Instagram in his honor, and the next time you're strolling the streets of Copenhagen, take a moment to appreciate how far this city has come from its humble beginnings as a tiny fishing village. And don't forget to raise a glass for Bishop Absalon, the warrior bishop who helped put Copenhagen on the map. Skål.
Nyhavn is probably one of the most iconic parts of all of Copenhagen, but did you know that it was actually built by the Swedes? Well, kind of. Let me explain. So Nyhavn construction started in 1670, and this was when King Christian V decided that he wanted to have part of the harbor reach in towards Kongens Nytorv, which is at the end of Nyhavn even today. In doing so, he decided to have it built not with Danish labor, but with prisoners of war from Sweden, from some of the recent Danish-Swedish wars. Now, back in those days, Sweden and Denmark weren't exactly friends. They spent more time fighting each other than anything else. So for 5 years, the canal was under construction, and now we have Nyhavn today, as it was built by the Swedish prisoners of war. It's not the only canal that was built in Copenhagen as well that was inspired by foreigners. Now, the Christiania neighborhood, which is one of the places we highly recommend visiting, it's absolutely beautiful with canals running through, was inspired by Amsterdam. And King Christian decided that he wanted to have his own version of Amsterdam here in Copenhagen. And so he instructed his people to have one built, and he got it named after himself. And that's where Christiania is today.
If you're lucky enough to stroll around Copenhagen or even float around Copenhagen, you might notice that many official buildings have 3 crowns perched on their spires. And no, it's not because the architects were obsessed with royal bling, but there's actually a pretty cool historical reason behind that trait. Back in the 15th century, Copenhagen was the capital of the Kalmar Union. This was a time when Denmark, Sweden, and Norway were united under one crown. And although these Nordic countries are best buds today, back then the Norwegians and Swedes were not so happy about being under Danish rule. And after a while, the whole union fell apart like a Jenga tower. But today you could say that the Danish queen still reigns over 3 lands because the Kingdom of Denmark includes not only Denmark itself, but also the autonomous regions of the Faroe Islands and Greenland. So the next time you're in Copenhagen and you spot those 3 crowns on the top of a building, you'll know the fascinating story behind them. Pretty cool, huh?
Another fun fact about Copenhagen is it's home to one of the world's oldest amusement parks. We're here at Tivoli Garden, which opened in 1843, and it's in fact the 3rd oldest amusement park in the world. The oldest is actually Bakken, north of Copenhagen as well. This is one of our favorite places here in Copenhagen to visit. I mean, it is an oasis of just child wonderment and fun, literally in the middle of the city. So when it was built in 1843, this actually used to be where the city walls ran through. And the guy who founded Tivoli convinced the king to give him some land here because when people are having fun and amusements, they don't worry about politics. And there's nothing to worry about politics here. It's a fantastic spot.
Yeah, Tivoli is absolutely one of the most fun legacies of Copenhagen, and it's just such a great place. We actually have season tickets, and that was one of the first things we did when we originally moved to Copenhagen, was decide to get season passes to Tivoli. Fun fact, it also inspired Walt Disney to build Walt Disneyland in California, and it's just inspired so many other people as they visited Copenhagen or lived here like us. So hopefully, if you make your way to Copenhagen, you'll stop in Tivoli and enjoy it yourself. You sadly don't see a lot of buildings in Copenhagen that were built before the 18th century. Let me tell you a little story that explains why. It's a story about a word that was born in the early 1800s called Copenhagenization. This fun little expression refers to a sneaky tactic used by the British Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. You see, back in the day, the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte created a thing called the continental system to try and mess with Britain's overseas trade. Not cool, Napoleon, not cool. And Denmark-Norway, who was neutral during that war, was suspected of leaning towards joining the embargo. Now, Denmark-Norway had a pretty impressive navy, and they were located right in the middle of Britain's trade route with Sweden. So, little Britain got in a little bit of nervousness and decided to take matters into their own hands. They landed an army on Sjælland, the island where Copenhagen is located, and things started to get a little bit crazy at that point. Long story short, the British ended up invading Copenhagen and bombed the hell out of the city after the Danish king refused to surrender his naval fleet. But get this, it wasn't the first time they even tried to do this. They actually bombed Copenhagen 6 years earlier for the same exact reason. And so the word Copenhagenization was born. It's a term that's used to describe a decisive blow delivered to a potential opponent while being at peace with that nation. Pretty sneaky, right? But let's just hope that we can avoid any more Copenhagenizations in the future. And maybe if you're British, you might want to just drop a little "I'm sorry" in the comments below.
Did you know that there's a semi-anarchist neighborhood inside Copenhagen? Well, there is, and it is Christiania. So the backstory is that this all used to be a giant military base, and this part of Copenhagen was covered with the military, and then after World War II, they started to leave the area, and they kind of fell into disrepair. In 1971, a group of local activists decided to come in here and start squatting on the area and take it over. And initially the authorities kind of turned a blind eye to it. They didn't really care about it, but over time the military kind of got annoyed, tried to kick them out and went back and forth, and eventually they just kind of accepted that everyone's kind of here. And over time people started to move in and build their own homes here, build their own community, and in truth it's kind of its own little place unto itself into the world. There's its own rules here, and in fact there's some things that are illegal in the rest of Denmark that are kind of tolerated legal here, especially around drugs. The main street in Christiania is called Pusher Street, and if you go there, you'll see vendors that are selling various drugs, especially things like cannabis and hash that are technically illegal here in Denmark. Now, every now and again, there tends to be some organized crime or issues that happen in here, and the police come in and do raids, which has the local citizens that live here reacting somewhat negatively. But after 50 years here together, everyone's kind of found a way to live in harmony. Christiania kind of exists to itself, and it's a really cool place to walk around and visit. It's a really neat experience to come through. There's some fantastic shops and some fantastic sites that you walk around and just see how people have chosen to live in a commune type of establishment here in Copenhagen. Definitely worth a visit.
On October 1st, 1989, a momentous event happened in this building right behind me, Copenhagen City Hall. It was a day that changed history. A new law was passed that allowed same-sex couples to be joined in a civil union, and 11 gay male couples seized the opportunity to tie the knot. Among them were a school psychologist, a Lutheran minister, and a high school teacher. Denmark's registered partner law was the first of its kind in the world, and it changed the game for LGBTQ+ community members. It granted gay and lesbian couples most of the same rights as married heterosexuals, which was a huge step forward in marriage equality. Of course, there were some downsides like, I guess the potential for divorce and paying alimony, but that's just part and parcel of the institution, right? Unfortunately, the law didn't cover adoption rights or church marriage ceremonies yet. Those came later, but it was still a significant victory for love and acceptance, and it was a first of its kind move. It happened in 1989. Think about that. What's really inspiring is that one of the grooms was a gay rights activist in Denmark who was fired from his job and was evicted from his landlord just for being gay. But he refused to be deterred, and he and his group lobbied tirelessly for years to make that day a reality. Their hard work and perseverance paved the way for this historic moment in 1989, and we are forever grateful for their contributions. The special part of history actually led Mike and I to get married in the same room in the same building in 2022. Love is love, y'all, and we've come a long way since 1989, but we still have a ways to go, so let's keep fighting for equality and acceptance in Copenhagen and around the world.
Now, the jewel of Copenhagen is obviously its harbor that runs through the heart of the city. But for many, many years, this wasn't a place that you could swim. And the reason is that, of course, the harbor was the commercial heart of the city. It was lined with all kinds of wharves and warehouses and industrial spaces. And so that meant that it wasn't suitable for humans to be in. That all changed in the late 20th century. In 1989, the city government decided to rezone the Suhavn neighborhood down the harbor that way from an industrial space to a residential space. This was one of the first changes that also drove them to be able to get rid of industrial and human waste that used to go into the harbor. They also rerouted all the sewers. They used to overflow when it rained so that the sewers would overflow into the harbors. In 1992, they had a huge investment to go ahead and reroute that into storage tanks to stop having raw sewage go into the harbor. They also dredged the harbor to get rid of some of the contaminated sludge. In doing all this over the course of the 1990s, the harbor was able to clean itself and be just as clean as the Baltic Sea that it leads into. In 2002, the first harbor baths opened, and this becomes one of the great recreational spaces of Copenhagen during the summertime. There's several of them that go up and down the harbor itself. There's also one up in Nyhavn, and there's also a man-made beach on Amager that's called Amager Strand. These are all amazing places where Copenhageners and tourists love to go to when the weather is nice in the summertime, to be able to jump in the harbor and swim. It's so clean that you can swim in here, and it's one of our favorite things to do every single summer.
It's an understatement to say that Copenhagen is a city that's totally bike crazy. With its manageable size and mostly flat terrain, biking has been the go-to mode of transportation in Copenhagen since the invention of the bicycle itself. Can you believe it? In fact, almost 50% of all commuter trips in Copenhagen are done by bike, which means you'll see way more bicycles than cars on the roads. Talk about being eco-friendly and fit at the same time. And get this, the city is so super bike friendly, it has almost 400 kilometers of dedicated bike lanes. Plus, they've even created cycling superhighways that take you out of the city and into the burbs. How cool is that? If you visit Copenhagen and don't have a bicycle that fits in your overhead compartment, you don't have to worry about getting one on the airplane at all. You can hop on a Donkey Republic bike, like the orange ones that you see all over town, like this one here, and you can use our channel name as a promo code. Type in Road Trotting for a 15% discount and discover Copenhagen in the most fun and eco-friendly way possible, on a bike.
Now, Danish may not exactly be the first cuisine that comes to mind when you're thinking about going out, Italian, Chinese, but Copenhagen is home to 15 Michelin-starred restaurants, most of any city in Scandinavia. And I'm standing in front of Noma right here, which was the beginning of the New Nordic Revolution. New Nordic is a culinary style that's concepted on following seasonal foods and also embracing ingredients that are native to the area where you are. So the idea was, rather than trying to create high gastronomic food that is using inspiration and ingredients from all over the globe, stay close to home. Let's go after the things that our ancestors ate in this area and drive on those instead. It was a revolution in the restaurant scene here in Copenhagen, and behind me at Noma is the place that started it all, and it was the best restaurant in the world many years in a row.
Oh, have you guys ever heard of Leif Sona? This guy is seriously passionate about beer, like really serious. It all started out as a simple hobby back in 1968. That's when he began collecting European brews. But before he knew it, Sona was on a mission to collect unopened beers from all corners of the globe. And I guess you could say that his collection grew faster than yeast in a fresh batch of ale, because by 1990, he had amassed a whopping 10,000 bottles. That's crazy. And he needed a bigger space than his home to store them all. So that's when the legendary Danish beer company Carlsberg, based here in Copenhagen, came knocking. They were so impressed with his massive collection and the growing popularity that came with it that they offered to showcase it in their very own brewery. You can visit the visitor center here in Copenhagen. And since some of Sona's earliest beers were actually Carlsberg brews, it only made sense for them to have them on display there. Fast forward to today, and Leif Sona's collection has continued to grow. At this point, it's over 22,000 bottles, unopened bottles of beer. That's right, you heard it correct. Over 22,000. And if that's not impressive enough, his collection even landed him in the Guinness, kind of ironic, Book of World Records for the largest bottled beer collection. So if you ever find yourself in Denmark, and I think you should, head to Copenhagen. If you're a beer lover, and maybe not as much as Leif Sona loves beer, but be sure to swing by Carlsberg's brewery and you can check out his incredible collection. It's on display there, and I've been there. It's a sight to behold. And who knows, you may even just have a newfound appreciation for the art of brewing. Cheers to Leif Sona and his underlying love for beer, and here's to you.
Now, we all know that Denmark is a flat country, but did you know that Copenhagen has its own ski hill? That's right, it's right behind me. It's Copenhagen, or Amagerbakken. And this is a place where in 2017 opened a trash incinerator that happens to have a ski hill on the top of it. You can see it kind of behind me, that it loops down like a little bit of a U shape from the top of the hill all the way down. And it means that it's actually the highest ski hill in all of Denmark. It's a really cool place as well, because the concept is that it's not only a trash incinerator, so it's a place that is able to generate electricity and district heat to heat our apartment, but it also is a recreation center to show that you can have sustainable resources like a trash incinerator that creates waste heat, as well as having a recreation area for the city to enjoy with a ski hill and a climbing wall and one of the best views of all of Copenhagen. So you can come to Copenhagen and go skiing. Bet you didn't know that.
Now let's talk about Copenhagen and its fascinating history with the Danish royal family. Believe it or not, back in the early days of Denmark, the capital city was, well, wherever the king decided to set up camp. So you heard that right. The royals were essentially a bunch of nomads. They kind of moved around from place to place, which is why spots in Denmark like Jelling hold such great importance to early Denmark. But eventually the royals did decide to settle down, and they made Copenhagen their permanent home and the modern capital. They set up camp in a grand castle on Slotsholmen over my shoulder, which is now home to Collectionborg Palace, which is the seat of the Danish parliament. And the first castle was built way back in 1167, so you know it's got some serious history. Fast forward a few centuries and we have the beautiful Amalienborg Palace, which is the main residence of the Danish royal family today. After a fire-destroyed Collectionborg Palace in 1794, the royals had to find a new home, and Amalienborg was just the right place. Except there were some noblemen living here who were kindly evicted by the newly homeless King Christian VII, although he did offer to buy it from them. But nowadays you can catch a glimpse of Queen Margrethe waving proudly from her balcony, which is pretty cool, and Copenhagen sure has come a long way from its nomadic days. Queen Margrethe II is a fascinating figure and beloved by the Danish people. And if you want to find out why and learn more about her, you can watch this video right here. You can hear about how she was born just before the German occupation of Denmark in World War II and what her parents hung in her nursery window as a baby as an act of resistance. Really great video. Watch it right here. And thanks for learning about Copenhagen with us today. Hi, hi.